I never thought my grandfather's dusty collection of antiquarian books would change my life. But as I stand here in my Manhattan penthouse, looking at the skyline that was once just a dream, I can trace it all back to those leather-bound volumes everyone in my family dismissed as worthless. They got the $10 million from Grandpa's estate. I got the books. That's how my family wanted it. Poor James, they whispered at the reading of the will, not even trying to hide their smirks. Always his grandfather's favorite, but all he got was those musty old books nobody wants. What they didn't know, what I didn't know then, was that between the pages of those ancient financial ledgers and banking histories lay something far more valuable than cash. Access codes to Swiss accounts that had been quietly accumulating interest since 1943. But this isn't just about money. It's about vindication. It's about the day I stood up at my cousin Bradley's wedding and revealed exactly what kind of family I came from. The day I finally stopped being their punching bag and became their worst nightmare. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Mine was served with champagne, at a black tie reception, in front of 300 guests who thought they knew everything about the prestigious Walker family. They had no idea what was coming. The Walkers weren't just wealthy, they were Massachusetts old money, the kind that's been around since before the Revolution. My father died when I was 4, leaving me at the mercy of my Uncle Richard, who grudgingly took me in but never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was living off his charity. "Remember, James," he'd say at dinner parties, hand heavy on my shoulder, "a Walker takes care of his own, even the less fortunate branches of the family tree." The guests would smile politely while I stared at my shoes, cheeks burning. My cousins, Bradley, Melissa, and Connor, took their cues from their father. I was the family project, the poor relation, the cautionary tale. Only Grandpa Theodore saw me differently. A self-made man who'd built a banking empire during the Depression, he had little patience for the entitled attitude that had infected his son's family. While Uncle Richard was busy maintaining appearances in Boston society, Grandpa would take me to his library in his Cambridge mansion. "These books," he'd say, running his gnarled fingers over the spines, "contain more wisdom than all those fools at the Harvard Club combined." He taught me to read financial statements when I was 10, discussed economic theory when I was 12, and gave me my first rare book, a first edition of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, when I turned 16. The summer before college, I overheard Uncle Richard in Grandpa's study. "For God's sake, Dad, stop filling the boy's head with nonsense. He'll never amount to anything in finance. The Walker blood is too thin in him." Grandpa's response was quiet. "Richard, you've never understood the difference between inheritance and earning. That's why I've made certain arrangements." I didn't understand what he meant until years later. The grand gesture came during my senior year at State College. I couldn't afford the Ivy League education that was considered birthright for Walker men. I'd been invited to Thanksgiving at the family estate in Concord, a rare occurrence that should have warned me something was wrong. Uncle Richard announced he was creating a family foundation, with each family member receiving a director role and accompanying salary, except me. Instead, he'd arranged an entry-level position at a friend's insurance company. "It's time you learned some responsibility, James," he declared as everyone nodded approvingly. "This way, you can finally contribute to the family name instead of just benefiting from it." What none of them knew was that I'd already started a small investment fund with money I'd saved working through college. What they also didn't know was that Grandpa had been secretly mentoring me, feeding me information and contacts. The secret was our plan to rebuild the Walker financial empire, but do it my way, outside the family's shadow. 3 weeks after that Thanksgiving, Grandpa died unexpectedly. The family was shocked when the will specified that while the liquid assets would be divided among Richard and his children, I would receive my personal library and all its contents, as James is the only one who will truly appreciate their value. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. I'm curious to see where this story is reaching. 6 months after Grandpa's death, I was still cataloging his massive library. Each book needed to be documented before being moved to my small apartment. Meanwhile, Bradley's wedding loomed, the social event of the season. A Walker marrying a Cabot, 2 Boston dynasties uniting. I received an invitation that felt more like a summons. "Of course you'll attend," Aunt Margaret insisted over the phone. Family appearances matter, James. And do try to rent a proper tuxedo this time. The week before the wedding, I discovered something odd while examining a 1930s banking ledger from Grandpa's collection. A series of numbers had been carefully inscribed in the margins using Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. Similar notations appeared in several other volumes. Codes, dates, references to Swiss institutions. When I found a letter tucked into a first edition of Banking Systems of Europe, my hands trembled. My dear James, it read, if you're reading this, I've passed on. These books contain more than knowledge, they contain access. The notations will guide you. Trust no one in the family with this information. They've forgotten what it means to earn their place. I spent 3 sleepless nights decoding his system, making calls to Zurich, verifying information. By the time Bradley's wedding arrived, I knew what Grandpa had done. The worthless books had been his true legacy to me, a key to accounts he'd established decades ago, accounts nobody else knew existed. The wedding was held at the St. Regis in New York, Uncle Richard's concession to the Cabot family's preferences. I arrived early, watching the Walker clan sweep in with their usual entitlement. Uncle Richard barely acknowledged me, too busy charming potential investors. Bradley, already half-drunk at his own wedding, slapped my back too hard. Jimmy, you actually cleaned up nice. Working at that insurance company must be paying better than we thought, he laughed. Investments are going well, I said vaguely. Sure they are. He winked. Hey, we seated you at table 19 with some second cousins and Mom's old college friends. Hope that's okay. During the ceremony, I sat in the back row, watching this family that had never accepted me celebrate itself. At the reception, Uncle Richard gave a toast praising the union of 2 families that understand the responsibilities of wealth and position, looking pointedly at me when emphasizing responsibilities. The breaking point came during the dinner. I overheard Richard at the next table, speaking to a banking associate. Poor Theodore became sentimental in his old age, he said, leaving those worthless books to James instead of something he could actually use. But we've taken care of him, found him a decent job. Family obligation and all that. Cousin Melissa stopped by my table, champagne sloshing from her glass. James, did you see? Daddy just announced an additional $5 million to Bradley and Catherine as a wedding gift from the foundation. Isn't that wonderful? The foundation that I'd been excluded from. Money that was partially from my grandfather's estate. My phone buzzed with an email confirmation from the Swiss banking consortium. The transfers were complete. The accounts were now officially mine. I stood up, champagne glass in hand. If you're enjoying this journey of revenge and redemption, hit that subscribe button and like this video to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Trust me, what happens next is something you won't want to miss. I tapped my spoon against my champagne flute, the crystal ringing out across the ballroom. Heads turned. First a few, then dozens, then the entire reception. Uncle Richard's face darkened when he saw me standing. I'd like to make a toast, I announced, my voice steadier than I expected. Bradley waved drunkenly. Floor's all yours, cousin. Make it quick though, band starting soon. The room quieted, 300 members of New York and Boston society watching with polite interest. I saw the Walkers exchange nervous glances. I wasn't on the approved toast list. To family legacy, I began, raising my glass. Which is something I've been thinking about since grandfather passed. The Walkers have always prided themselves on financial acumen, on understanding value where others don't. Isn't that right, Uncle Richard? Richard nodded cautiously, his smile fixed. When Grandpa left me his library, everyone here thought he'd slighted me. I looked around the room, making eye contact with those who had laughed at my inheritance. The poor relation got the books while the real Walkers got the money. But Grandfather Theodore understood something that's been forgotten in this family. True value isn't always obvious. I pulled out my phone and opened an email. This morning, I received confirmation from the United Bank of Switzerland. The accounts my grandfather established in 1943, accounts he left clues to in his books, have been transferred to my name. Uncle Richard's smile vanished. Aunt Margaret gripped the edge of the table. I won't bore everyone with numbers, I continued, but let's just say the interest on Grandpa's original deposits has been compounding for 80 years. The Walker fortune you all divided? It was pocket change compared to what Grandpa kept separate. The room had gone completely still. Bradley was no longer smirking. Catherine, his bride, was whispering urgently in his ear. Grandfather left a letter explaining his decision. He wrote that he watched his family become what he despised, entitled, lazy, believing themselves superior not because of what they'd built, but because of their name. He wrote that only one person in the family reminded him of himself. My voice cracked slightly. He wrote that I was the only true Walker left. Richard surged to his feet. This is preposterous. James, you're making a scene at your cousin's wedding with these ridiculous claims. I held up my phone, displaying the bank confirmation. The accounts were verified yesterday. I'm now worth considerably more than the entire Walker family combined. I smiled thinly. And unlike the family foundation, I won't be offering director positions to any of you. The gasps were audible. Someone dropped a glass. Catherine's father, Old Money himself, was watching the scene with undisguised fascination. James, Uncle Richard hissed, approaching me, this is not the place. It's exactly the place. I cut him off. In front of everyone who's watched you treat me like a charity case my entire life. In front of the business associates you've told I wasn't a real Walker. In front of the society you value more than family. I turned back to the stunned crowd. I'd like to apologize to the bride and groom for this interruption. As a wedding gift, I've established a charitable foundation in your names, focused on supporting foster children and family reunification services. $20 million, to start. I set down my glass and walked toward the exit, stopping briefly beside my uncle. The books are priceless, by the way, I said quietly. But then, you never bothered to look inside them. As I reached the door, I heard Melissa's voice rise hysterically. Daddy, is it true? What does this mean for us? I didn't stay to hear his answer. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. I spent the night at the Pierre, ignoring the barrage of calls and texts from family members who had suddenly discovered my number. By morning, the story had leaked to certain financial circles. A long-forgotten fortune emerging after decades, the dramatic revelation at a high society wedding. I wasn't surprised when Catherine's father, Harrison Cabot, requested a breakfast meeting. That was quite a performance, he said, stirring his coffee in the hotel restaurant. Though I suspect it wasn't just for show. The accounts are real, I confirmed. Grandfather established them during World War II, separate from his known assets. Harrison nodded. Smart man. And you're certain about the documentation? Everything's verified. The books didn't just contain clues, some had actual banking documents bound into the covers. Grandfather was thorough. Harrison studied me for a moment. Richard has been leveraging the Walker name to push out smaller firms for years. He squeezed my brother's investment company until it collapsed. He extended his hand. I believe we may have mutual interests. That meeting was the first of many. Within weeks, I had established Walker Private Capital, with strategic alliances that specifically countered Uncle Richard's business interests. The family tried everything, legal challenges to the will, claims that I had manipulated my grandfather, even attempts to have the books declared family historical assets that should have been shared. None of it worked. Grandfather's documentation was impeccable. Melissa was the first family member to reach out directly. We met at a quiet cafe in Cambridge, near where Grandpa's house had been. They're panicking, she admitted, looking more grounded than I'd ever seen her. Daddy made some risky investments, counting on the foundation to cover any losses. And now the foundation is exposed, I concluded. She nodded. Bradley and Catherine's marriage is already strained. The Cabots are distancing themselves, except for Harrison, who everyone knows is working with you. What do you want, Melissa? She pushed a folder across the table. Financial records Daddy doesn't know I have access to. He's been mismanaging the family trusts for years. Her eyes met mine. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a job. I have a finance degree nobody in the family ever took seriously. This revelation led to another. Cousin Connor approached me next, revealing that he'd discovered Uncle Richard had been siphoning money from Grandpa's medical trust in his final years, potentially hastening his death by denying him certain treatments. I went to medical school against Daddy's wishes, Connor explained. When I questioned Grandpa's care, I was shut out of family decisions. The picture that emerged was of a family more fractured than I'd realized, with Richard maintaining control through financial manipulation and intimidation. The books hadn't just given me wealth, they'd given me the power to uncover the truth. The most unexpected conversation came 6 months after the wedding. Aunt Margaret requested a meeting at her Beacon Hill home. "Your mother would be proud of you," she said, surprising me with the first mention of my mother I'd heard from her in decades. "You never speak of her," I said cautiously. Margaret sighed. "Richard forbade it. He blamed her for your father's death, said she'd distracted him, caused the accident." "The accident wasn't her fault. It was a drunk driver." "I know. But Richard needed someone to blame, and your mother was an outsider." She hesitated. "There's something you should know about your grandfather. After your parents died, Richard tried to have you sent to distant relatives. Theodore threatened to disinherit him if he didn't take you in." The revelation stunned me. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know who truly fought for you." She reached for a worn envelope. "And because Theodore left this with me, to give to you when the time was right. I think that time has come." The letter inside revealed the final piece. Grandpa had created the Swiss accounts specifically for me, from his personal funds, separate from the family business. He'd used the banking crisis of the 1940s to quietly transfer assets, knowing that someday the family would try to edge me out. He'd written, "James reminds me of myself, an outsider the Walkers never fully accepted. The difference is that I built my own legacy. Now I'm ensuring he can build his." With this knowledge, I made a decision. I established the Theodore Walker Foundation for Financial Education, dedicated to teaching financial literacy in underserved communities. I funded research into the medical conditions that had affected my grandfather. And I offered positions in my new company to both Melissa and Connor, who proved to be talented in ways their father had never acknowledged. The grand gesture I had planned, systematically dismantling Uncle Richard's business empire, evolved into something more meaningful, building something new that honored my grandfather's true legacy. The unexpected twist came a year later when Bradley, now divorced from Catherine, showed up at my office, sober and humbled. "I've got nothing left," he admitted. "Dad's broke, the family name is toxic in Boston, and I've never actually worked a day in my life." He looked up, vulnerability replacing the arrogance I'd always known. "I don't deserve your help. But I'm asking anyway." Instead of a job, I offered him something else. A chance to be the first student in the Foundation's intensive financial training program, designed for adults starting from zero. "It won't be easy," I warned him. "You'll be treated like everyone else, no special treatment." "That might be exactly what I need," he said. 5 years have passed since that wedding day. The books that everyone dismissed now sit in a custom-built library in my home, a daily reminder that value isn't always where people expect to find it. The Theodore Walker Foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined, with campuses in 12 cities across the country. Our financial literacy programs have helped thousands of families build sustainable futures. Bradley, surprisingly, has become one of our most effective instructors, his first-hand experience with both privilege and loss giving him a unique perspective that resonates with students. Uncle Richard refused all contact until his heart attack last year. I paid for the medical care his depleted insurance wouldn't cover. We've spoken twice since then, brief, awkward conversations, but without the hostility that defined our relationship for decades. Some wounds may never fully heal, but I've learned that holding grudges requires energy better spent elsewhere. Melissa runs our investment division now, her talent for spotting market opportunities rivaling my own. Connor established a medical wing of the foundation, ensuring that elderly patients receive the care my grandfather was denied. We're not a conventional family, but we've built something meaningful from the ruins of what came before. As for me, I still sometimes wake up expecting to find myself in that small apartment, surrounded by books I didn't yet know how to read. The wealth isn't what changed my life. It was the knowledge that my grandfather saw something in me worth believing in, worth protecting through elaborate means that spanned decades. The true inheritance wasn't money. It was the confidence to stand up and claim my place in the world. I often wonder what Grandpa would think of what I've built. Not the financial empire, he created one of those himself, but the relationships restored, the family members who found their own value away from Richard's shadow. I think he'd be pleased to see his books still being used, still teaching lessons to those willing to look beyond the obvious. There's a quote from one of his favorite volumes that I keep framed on my desk. The real measure of wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you set in motion. I didn't understand what that meant until I saw the ripple effects of that wedding toast, how one moment of truth created possibilities for so many people. If you've stayed with my story until now, perhaps you've experienced your own moments of underestimation or family complexity. Remember that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's obvious to everyone else. It's the wisdom to see worth where others don't, and the courage to stand up when the moment demands it. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and join our community. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever discovered value in something others overlooked? How did you handle it? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, this is James Walker, reminding you that sometimes the things others dismiss as worthless contain the keys to everything that matters.